Yeah. Oh, never mind. Jacob got it. All right, cool. Welcome everyone to whatever week this is. We're going to be going over pen testing, internal networks, the basics. And when I say the basics, I'm more referring to the tactics and the techniques, the methodology that is currently like being implemented by most pen testers with that do internal network engagements. It's going to be a very technical topic. So if you get lost, it's not a surprise. Just always ask questions because that's how you learn in this sort of field. Before we go into the meeting, become a paid member. It helps us out and you get some cool stuff out of it. Get t-shirts, going to be qualified for a raffle that we hold for Raspberry Pis, right? Something like that. And you get a stole for graduation. A little bit of who I am first. I'm a junior in the CIS major, so you don't need to be something super technical like a computer engineer or computer science major to get any of this stuff done. Anybody can do it because I'm doing it. Anyways, I'm on Discord all the time. Oh, thank you. My name is Nigel on Discord. Feel free to send me a DM if you ever have any questions. I read them all and I answer like 98% of them. The other two I forget because I'm sleeping. Table contents for today. We're going to be starting off with just a little bit of background knowledge on internal networks because we actually have to know what we're attacking, why we're attacking it. And then we're going to be going over initial access and then privilege escalation within its sort of test. So, a little precursor, we're going to be going over internal networks. I mean, it's sort of in the name, right? Internal network, it's the network that's internal. Not the networks that exist aren't like one dimensional or flat. There's multiple layers to them. And what a lot of people do is they harden their perimeter. They have a lot of defenses on the outside, but the inside is, it gets neglected. And it's our job as the internal network testers to find, exploit those misconfigurations and the vulnerabilities within the network, and then let the clients know what's wrong with it. Because you can have all of the hardened technical controls on the outside. You have your network segmentation, you can have your firewalls, your intrusion detection and prevention systems as much as you want. But then somebody sends a phishing email, your employee clicks on it, and they just kind of skipped all of that stuff. So it's important to achieve defense in depth by understanding the security posture, not just outside on the perimeter, but also on the inside. We can't talk about internal networks without talking about Active Directory. Active Directory is a Microsoft product, sort of free-ish. You could just spin up Active Directory if you really want to, and it's a little goofy. No, and this is going to summarize the Active Directory experience. It's like, oh, it's going to be a fun topic to go into, right? It's a field to learn, I don't know, security. Either you want to pen test it or you want to harden it. It gets really deep really quickly. There's a lot, and mastering Active, well, you're never going to be an Active Directory master, but getting skilled in Active Directory is a career path or a significant career skill on its own. If you know how to administrate it properly, or if you know how to test it very well, then you can build a career off of that very easily. So what is Active Directory though? It's a directory service by Microsoft, and a directory service just means that it helps manage and keep track of a lot of resources in the network, essentially. These resources I'll be covering in the next slide. The reason why we care about it and why it's directly related to internal network testing is because some number like 85 to 90% to 95% of internal networks are going to be leveraging it to perform internal network stuff. Main reason is it's effective at what it does. It makes it pretty easy to manage a large volume of company resources. You gotta think companies have thousands of computers, they have thousands of people using those computers. How do you manage all of that, right? Active Directory is probably, to my awareness, one of the only things that exist to serve that, to effectively answer that use case. Problem is, it sucks from a security standpoint. By default, it's very lenient in what it does. And it gets, I mean, as you can sort of tell, there's this thing here. That's reason. As you can probably tell by this diagram, you can see even for this this is a really simple domain. We'll be going over what that is in a bit. But there is a lot going on, and it's really easy for things to start stepping on each other and sort of being like, it's like a giant net. You do one thing and all of a sudden 15 things change and you don't know it. And because of this, it becomes very easy and to misconfigure Active Directory. And this results in internal networks having a lot of a hidden mess that the administrator and the IT people, security people, they're not too aware of until we as testers go about testing, finding those vulnerabilities. Yeah, but in general, the whole goal of Active Directory is want to manage the identity, the access, and configure all of these resources from a central point and relatively easily. So there's going to be a little breakdown of some Active Directory objects. There's more, but this is going to be what's really important for this presentation, for the scope of this presentation. You have a domain, which in this case is going to be just, you can think of it as the largest unit of grouping, sort of like how continent's like a big landmass, I guess. The domain is the largest unit of grouping we're going to be going over for the scope of this presentation. And you have a domain controller. This is the thing that's going to, it's an actual server, and this handles authentication and helps manage the domain. You can have multiple domain controllers for backup purposes, right? One falls down, you have another to keep things running. Domain controllers push out policies to the domain. This is how you're able to manage and configure so many resources at scale. Next up, we have domain computers. This is going to be just a computer that's joined within the domain. So all those computers in the library, right? You're able to just log in with your Cal Poly creds with them because they're all domain joined. But it's not just computers that can be domain joined. It's literally just like any computing object that can do network stuff. So computers, printers, I think even fax machines, potentially, I don't know. Smart card readers, they can all be domain joined, right? It gets messy. Next up, you have the users, which are like us, right? We just people that exist on the domain, right? They typically, you can just authenticate to the domain as a user, which like how we can log into any of those computers in the library, or like how I was able to log onto this computer here. There wasn't an IT guy that went on every individual machine and created like 30,000 accounts for every student here. It was all Active Directory. Next up, we have groups, which are sort of like a container that you can put users under. And you have organizational units, which are also containers that you can also put users under. They can effectively do the same thing, but it's more of a best practicing that you separate the use case of them. So you'll typically only have users in your groups, and in your organizational units, you have groups of similar collections of objects. So then you can manage all of them through group policies. And the thing is, within these groups or organizational units, you could put other groups and organizational units. You can have like a nested group in a sense. And because of this, there's going to be a lot of inheritance when it comes to the policies and configurations I put out. This inheritance is going to cause a lot of unintended consequences. You might be doing one change. You're like, oh, I'm just applying this one change, this one permission, this one update to this group. And then like 40,000 users get affected, and now your domain is really questionable from a security standpoint. Next up are the Active Directory protocols. These are sort of the services that Active Directory is going to expose, and these are the services that we'll be interacting a lot with. You don't need to know exactly how they work, because I don't know, there's probably like a 500-page book on each of these on their own. You don't need to know all that. All we really need to know is SMB, server message block. It's a protocol that is used to share files, right? You can set up a file share on your Windows computer and access it from another computer without like any other extra software. You just type in your file explorer, computer name, and access the files. It also does a lot of complicated stuff that's helpful for us in testing. You don't really need to know all that though, but it's complicated. Then you have LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. This is the directory in Active Directory. This is the thing that allows Active Directory to identify all the resources and work with them. And then you have Kerberos, which is an authentication protocol. Probably shouldn't have put it up here because we're actually not really touching Kerberos at all. not even in the workshop, but it is something still to keep in mind. Attacks on Active Directory's implementation of Kerberos protocol is its own crazy field in itself, and hours of research is done on that. Like that's an understatement. It doesn't describe the scale, but anyways, let's talk about initial access. The reason why we're going to talk about initial access is, yes, this is an internal test. We're in the network. That doesn't mean that we have a host that's compromised or credentials to access Active Directory, which we might, right? Now, within an internal network test, you might be put in one of three or multiple situations. You might just have network access. You can talk to the machines, but you're not actually in the domain. You don't have a machine that's compromised that you can pivot through to attack the other machines on the network. You can just talk to them. Second case might be you have credentials, so you can actually authenticate to Active Directory and really just skip this whole step right here. And the last situation is you might have what's called shell or remote access to a machine. So basically, it's like an assumed breach where they already have a machine that's compromised, and you get to work off of that to sort of move laterally and compromise other hosts within that network. But worst case scenario, we have nothing. We can just talk to the boxes. So let's talk. So we're going to go over initial access. And for initial access, one of the attacks that we'll be doing is something called Almanar poisoning. It stands for link local multicast name resolution, but it's too many words, right? Too many words. At its heart, it's just a name resolution protocol, right? You don't type in Google's IP to find Google. You type Google, you type a name. We identify computers by names because no one's remembering all those numbers, right? This serves a similar use case to that. So typically in name resolution, what happens is you talk to you ask a server, the DNS, the domain name service. You just talk to the DNS server and say, hey, who is Google? And he's like, oh, it's this IP. And then you could just put it in there. Internal networks have their own private names that aren't exposed publicly. So they have their own stuff going on in there. What's going to happen is Almanar serves as a fallback for when DNS fails, or if you're really old, because this thing is like 20-something years old, it was implemented in Active Directory before DNS was implemented. And because of this, it's old, it's a little questionable. What it basically does is if a computer can't figure out who the name is because either the computer doesn't know it and or the DNS server can't resolve it for them, they're going to start shouting to everyone else in the network, just asking, who is this computer? And then either A, none of the computers know and just cry about it, right? Or B, one of the computers does know who that computer is and they respond and tell the person who is asking everybody what that computer actually is. And the reason why we're interested in this is you can do some funny stuff with it as an attacker. By poisoning Almanar, or essentially responding maliciously to Almanar, we can obtain credentials to users within Active Directory. These credentials can lead us access to a machine, or we can access file shares through that compromised user to then, just find more sensitive information and continue our test from there. And by getting those domain user credentials, that's essentially our foothold in the test. That's our foothold into Active Directory, because now we can access it and we can access the entirety of LDAP and all the fun stuff that has to offer. The actual tools we'll be working with, there's three. There's Responder, there's Hashcat, and there's Impacket. Responder is the tool that's going to be performing the poisoning in Almanar. Hashcat is used to crack a hash, on that in a bit. And an Impacket is a library and a tool set that's used to actually abuse Active Directory. And we could feed our credentials that we extract through this attack into Impacket to perform some stuff such as getting remote access to a machine or going through file shares and seeing what interesting files are there on the system. So for Almanar poisoning, it's going to start with us, the attacker, right? I mean, because we're attacking Almanar. And you literally just run the responder tool and it just starts doing stuff, right? It starts poisoning the Almanar requests that machines are going to be sending out. And for reference, Almanar is enabled by default for even maybe the most up-to-date. I know as server 19, not the most up-to-date. I think it's server 22 that's most recent. Even server 19, Element R is still enabled by default, so it's interesting. Now we have our name server. There's going to be our DNS server that I was talking about earlier, the central server used to resolve names. And then you have a client who, doing client things, are trying to access resources on the network, right? The client, is going to try to access SMB shares, right? He's going to try to access the file share. So they're going to type in their file explorer, file share, and then, I don't know, some cool files. They want to get something for their work. But that's not an IP, that's a name. So the computer is going to talk to the name server and say, whose file share? Because that's a typo. Funny client made a typo. What's the worst a typo could do, right? I don't know. Largely I do know, but yeah, name server say, I don't know, man. I don't know. I know a file share. I don't know a file share. I'm not gonna fix your typos and interpret them for you. I'm just a computer, bro, right? So then the client's computer with Element R enabled, because by default, that's a thing, is gonna start yelling out across the whole network. Who's file share? I don't know who this is, and I'm trying to access cool files on file share, right? And remember, this is an internal network test. We're in the network. So when Element R kicks in and asks the whole network, we're there. We're there to answer because we're running responder, which is going to poison the request. So the attacker machine, right, running response, is going to say, hey, that's me, buddy. And now that we responded, we identified ourselves, the client computer is going to say, hey, I want to check it out then, right? I want to see file share because I'm trying to access the cool files up there. You guys can read that. Hopefully it's big enough. And with our poison response, we're going to say, sure. But to access my SMB share, right, you're going to need it to authenticate to me. This is where Windows is funny. It's not going to ask you, oh, you want to access file share? Here, you have to authenticate. Windows is like, I'm going to be really convenient and authenticate for you. So you could just, get the files that you want, right? So, you put in your little typo, right? You don't think much of it. And then this stuff happens in the background where the attacker is just like, oh, cool, poison response. Here's a password hash now, right? There's a password hash with a little orange blob on the bottom. Now the attacker is just going to be like, cool, I'm going to crack it now. And the password's just bro, right? This is where the attack has, a bit of a mitigation. Assuming you are forced to keep Element R on for some reason, the mitigation is just have a strong password. They're not going to crack it, right? But funny thing is, computers also do a lot of network trafficking in the background. So, maybe one person has a strong password, but who knows about the other 40,000 people in your internal network, right? I don't know. And you just crack it. In this case, because it's administrative credentials, we can now use the impacted tool set to get remote access to the computer, right? So there we go. Now we have system level access because the administrator who either who put the typo, they might have known their administrator might have been accidentally logged in, who knows? This is why it's not the best idea to always be logged in and doing things as the admin account. But they put a little typo like, oh, my bad. Let me just put the H in next time. And the attacker who was on the network was like, oh, that's sick, bro. I got system level remote access, which is above administrative access. It's literally your system itself. That's why it's called system. That's pretty bad. But what we care as attackers, even if we don't get this administrative credential, because maybe we just got low privilege credential, maybe we just got normal guys credentials, right? Now we have our foothold, not on the machine, but to Active Directory, because we care more about Active Directory than the machines, honestly. Now that we have our foothold in, we can talk about privilege escalation. Speed running to domain admin or DA. So there's two types of privilege escalation. There's horizontal escalation where you're going to start compromising other users on Active Directory, but they're not necessarily going to be more privileged than you. So this would be like going from one of these positions, one of these more non-technical positions, like that usually don't have a lot of privileges allocated to them, right? You might go from like a sales analyst to product manager, right? You may not have more privileges on the domain, but this still gives you access to interesting things. Maybe there's a program or a software or a computer that they have access to that provides an interesting nugget of information. But in general, you don't really get any technical value out of this type of escalation. It's still worth looking into though, if you're out of options. The primary thing that we are going to be looking into is something called vertical escalation. This is what you would think of when you think of privilege escalation. You want to see how can I get more privileges to compromise the Active Directory, right? So this is like going from a standard low privilege user who could do basically nothing, not even log into a computer, to say somehow compromising the help desk user. Maybe that user who's a part of the help desk group has administrative access to a set of machines because they're help desk, right? They have to be able to remote in, help you figure out and troubleshoot, right? So that would be an example of vertical escalation. You're getting more privileges on that Active Directory. And the way we go about this, there's going to be two techniques. The first one we're covering over is something called SAM and LSA dumping. SAM stands for the Security Account Manager, and LSA stands for the Local Subsystem Authority. What this use case for us is, or the use case for Windows is SAM stores local account credentials, right? So your account on your Windows laptop, that password, a hash of it is stored in SAM. LSA stores secrets. I don't know what a secret is. It's a bunch of random stuff. But what is interesting is there are a few secrets that are of particular interest for us, mainly service accounts and scheduled tasks. So if you ever set up a scheduled task on your Windows computer, or maybe you set up a service, or like my mouse for some reason has a service running in the background on my computer, I don't know, some driver thing related probably. Regardless, the accounts, the thing is to do whatever they need to do for the service to run on the computer, for the scheduled task to actually do something, it needs to run as a user on the computer. It needs credentials. LSA stores those credentials, and it's possible to actually reverse the encryption on them and get the complete clear text from them. So our goal is, if we get administrative access to a machine, all we want to do is just start dumping SAM and LSA, because people reuse passwords. Users exist across multiple machines, right? And then by dumping SAM and LSA, this gives us more user account access. This gives us the capacity for horizontal escalation, because maybe this user exists somewhere else on another computer. And this also gives us that vertical escalation opportunity, because maybe this user exists somewhere else, but they're also admin to that computer. So now we can dump SAM and LSA again. Same with service account credentials and scheduled task stuff. Just spray those credentials everywhere. For the tools, you just do crackmap exec. It's an implementation of the in-packet library. Nearly the same thing. It's just nice because it has some extra functionality built on top of it, and we could just use it to dump SAM and LSA. And it's this simple. You authenticate with administrative credentials by just passing in the arguments, and you put the SAM or the LSA flag, and you got stuff. You can crack it. Well, in the workshop this week, we're actually going to talk about how you don't need to actually crack any of these passwords. Your passwords are kind of useless in Windows. And you also got some other LSA stuff down here. 90% of this, I don't really do anything with it. Except maybe the DP API machine keep. That's out of scope for this. There was no service account, and there was no scheduled task running on the computer that got LSA dumped. So there's no plain text here. So this was honestly a bad example. But there have been like engagements where all we have to do is just, we say we did the LMNR poisoning, and it turns out that one user we cracked the credentials for has admin access to like one machine of the 40,000. Cool, right? It's just one machine. You dump SAM and LSA, you start spraying these credentials everywhere. All of a sudden now we have access to 5 more machines, and maybe 2 of them we have admin access to. And then you just keep doing that chain. And then all of a sudden, I compromised the domain by just sheer password reuse and account reuse, essentially. That's the funny thing about SAM and LSA dumping. It seems simple, because you're just like, this one command, and it turns out, wow, pop the whole domain. Cool. Now, the other privilege escalation privilege escalation technique we're going to be talking about is ACE abuse. ACE stands for access control entity. It's essentially a right something has over another. You can think of it as permissions. If you've ever clicked a folder on Windows for some reason, said who has read or write access. I've never done that, but that's an example of applying ACEs. And the reason why ACEs exist is because as an administrator, you don't want the only account on your domain, the admin account, to be able to do everything. You want to be able to delegate privileges. You want to allow this one group to manage this one organizational unit. You might want to have this other user manage this group. You might want this group to manage all these other users. That's part of the selling point of Active Directory is you can delegate permissions. This is done through ACEs. Problem is, you apply one ACE, and all of a sudden, like 50,000 things have that ACE because you didn't realize there was like 3 nested children within that group that the ACE was applied to, or the organizational unit it was applied to. This is what I was talking about earlier, where Active Directory is like this giant net. You do one change, and it's like, oh, this program isn't working. This computer isn't doing what it needs to. This IT article says, apply this one permission, it works. And all of a sudden, your domain is just poop now. Now, the goal of the attacker for us is to just use these ACEs as they are to escalate our privileges. We might have, let's say we might have what's called write access to a user. We can then force them to reset their password. And now we could just log into that user with a password that we've set on them, right? So to abuse ACEs, there's going to be a few tools. There's Bloodhound, which is the dog. You know, it's really named because, you know, he'd be sniffing, right? He get all that good stuff from LDAP. I'm not going to manually look at LDAP and see, oh yeah, this guy has an ace on this, because any given object might have like 80 aces on them. I'm not reading through all that, but the dog can. The dog is cool. The dog knows what he's doing, right? I don't. Now there's Bloody AD, which is the tool that's actually going to abuse those aces. Well, I'll be going over an example of what an ace abuse is. And we have Impacket because Impacket is Impacket, and we can use it to just do stuff to Active Directory. Awesome. Now, ace abuse. So start off our attack, us the attack, we run the dog, right? Clear a dog. Now, there's 2 parts to Bloodhound. There's the ingester, and then there's a visualizer. When I say run in Bloodhound, I literally mean both. We're going to set the visualizer because we want to visualize our data. It visualizes in a series of nodes and edges, some graph theory stuff, but I'm not computer science, so I wouldn't know that. And unlucky. No, I'm joking. Then we have the actual ingester, which is the things literally sniffing the data. Remember when I was talking earlier, where LDAP, everything's an object. LDAP is used to manage all those objects and attributes related to those objects. The ingester is going to go ahead and grab all that information in LDAP because it's Active Directory. It's all public. It's all readable by anybody. Well, like 98%, which is the important part, right? So with a low privilege domain user, you could see like 99% of the relationships that one object has over another in the domain. All that read access is just given by Active Directory, which makes it really convenient as an attacker because then we could just kind of blow stuff up. So run Bloodhound, right? Run the ingester, feed the ingester's data into the visualizer. This is the visualization we get. In this case, there's an SBC agent user and there's a IT group. Yellow's group, users, I mean, there's 3 people. Yeah, icons, it's just a group. And that little skull emoji, the skull emoji just means it's a compromised user. So for reference, in this demo, I know we compromised the administrator account previously, but for this particular example, let's just say we compromised the SBC agent account for the sake. And that little line is called an edge. That's an actual term in graph theory. I don't know what it means, but for Bloodhound, it means it's a permission we have on something else. So this just means that's compromised user we have has something called generic all on the IT group. Generic all just means all of the generic permissions. So read, writing, might even be able to, I don't know if we could delete it, but we could do a bunch of stuff to it essentially. In Bloodhound, you can actually right click it and click help, and it actually tells you how to abuse it and what it is. It's really convenient. Now that we know what relationship we have, what ace we have, we can abuse it with the Bloody AD tool. In this case, because we have generic all, we could just add ourselves to that IT group. We're not a part of IT, but we have the privilege to just add ourselves in. So we could go ahead and just do that by, oh, that's a nice password. By just providing the credentials to the SBC agent account, you just feed it into Bloody AD, tell it where the domain controller is, and tell us what do we want to do with these credentials. Well, I want to add a group member to the IT group, and the person I'm going to add is this service agent object on LDAP, and it just says, hey, yeah, go ahead and did it, cool. And we actually query LDAP. This is why I don't like querying LDAP. I'm not reading all that. In no way. But at the bottom, that's the interesting part, right? After adding ourselves in, we are in the group. Who would have known? That's crazy. And from here, whatever privileges that IT group has, we can now take advantage of too. So we use one object to compromise a group. Now we're in the group. Maybe that group has more privileges because it probably does. And we just sort of branch our way throughout the rest of Active Directory until we get domain admin. And for reference, you might be thinking, why would anybody give someone all the privileges on one group? Well, on the engagement I was on, we run Bloodhound. It's a big environment. It's like 17,000 computers, 60,000 users, right? And so the Bloodhound takes like 2 hours to run, and took my Mac like, it took it 2.5 weeks to visualize. That's crazy. And I visualize it, and I'm seeing there's a group in Active Directory called Everyone. Take a guess who's in it. It's everyone, right? And this everyone group had, I'm going to call it a path to domain admin, because they could compromise one user, or they had a privilege on one user, they had a privilege on a group, that had a privilege on another user. That user had a privilege on domain admin. So literally, you could be anybody in the domain, any of those 47,000 users or 13,000 computers. And you could just escalate and compromise the one domain for the company. And the whole company was running under one domain. And then from there, all you would have to do is, if you were a threat actor, all you would need to do, get that domain admin, then make a group policy that drops ransomware, and boom, whole company is ransomware, just like that. Anybody could do it. So Active Directory is pretty nuts. It's because of these little aces, these little relationships that everything has on each other. And this isn't even the worst of it. There's like 3 or 4 more stupid things that Active Directory does that are really abusable. But that's out of scope for this for today's presentation, because those 3 things were already a lot, but there's like 30 more. Putting everything together, or internal testing methodology. We're going to start off trying to get initial access. We're going to perform what's called man-in-the-middle attacks, or MITM, or machine-in-the-middle, sorry. And that's an example of that was the element R poisoning was an example of an MITM attack. But there's also exploits that we could do. You know how they always say patch your systems because exploits exist. Wow, shocker, right? And these exploits can lead to full domain compromise or system compromises. So also just throwing those is always nice to check, because those are honestly really free. You could just spin up a tool called Metasploit, open source free. You could just install on Kali, comes built into Kali. And then you just load up an exploit and shoot it at a computer. And it's like, oh, it worked, cool. Compromise the domain. There was exploits that have done that in recent time too. There was also web exploitation, because yes, you're on an internal. Why would there be web? Well, companies have internal websites, they have internal resources that they use. And this is what I used for my engagement is we had no access, we had no domain user, we had no remote session to or assumed breach situation, but we had access to the network, which means we could access the web applications. We just exploited the web application, and we were able to, in this case, gain access to Active Directory. But sometimes a compromise of the web application may lead to computer access. Computer access to a domain joined system is the same thing as breaching Active Directory. So all the same stuff. And once you have your initial access, you want to escalate your privileges. We went over credential spraying with SAM and LSA dumping. We went over ACE abuses. But then there's Kerberos, which is one of the 50 million abuses that Kerberos protocol has. And then there's something called Active Directory Certificate Services, or ADCS. There's been recent research on this. It's a new word topic, like 2 years old now. But yeah, we'll be going over it in the workshop. It's all scope of the presentation right now. And then once you pop the whole domain, cool, right? The test doesn't stop there. On average, for an internal test, that might say it lasts like 1 or 2 weeks, right? It might take you 1 day or 2 days to gain administrative access to the domain, because that's just how bad these things are. I think the fastest at the company I was at was 25 minutes to compromise a whole domain. So it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad out there. It's But so it's like, oh, okay, cool. This 2-week test, I finished in 25 minutes. No, the client's not gonna like that, right? You gotta start auditing from the top, and this is the boring part. What? I love this stuff. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So once you start compromising this stuff from the top down, you're gonna try to go ahead and see what other paths, it's not just one path to domain admin. There's gonna be more. There's gonna be many more, right? So now that you have the top view down, you have more visibility into those paths, and then you can actually test and see if you could replicate those paths and have more findings in your report, and write a 120-page report with like 50 findings, and then cry because you spent 100 billable hours that week. Fun. Now you might be wondering, why, how do I get started? Because this sounds fun, totally. Well, you start by asking questions. No one got anywhere by just being stuck and struggling, right? You have to speak up, say, I don't know this. I want to learn how to do this. Second thing is, you got to be familiar with the Linux command line. As you probably saw with all of that, all those screenshots, I'm using Kali Linux. The majority of these tools are going to be on Linux, except Commando VM. Shout out to my boy, my brother. That's a Windows pen testing VM, but it still uses Linux too within it. So it's just important to know that skill. And there's also going to be, after you're familiar with navigating the command line, you're going to want to do something called try hack me. This is going to be how you build up your methodology and get familiar with techniques and attacks. Because it's kind of guided, right? When you do try hack me, it'll guide you through what's called the room, which is like the module, the learning module. It'll tell you how to do things. It'll give you hints and all that, which is nice. Now you know how to do something. Except, in the real world, not always going to have someone holding your hand. You got to just figure it out. And that's what Hack the Box is going to be for. Not the most realistic environments because it's only one domain controller and maybe 20 users. But, it's good enough. With Hack the Box, you're going to be going in blind, and you're going to have to figure out how to apply that methodology, those techniques that you learned from Try Hack Me into an environment that is going to be kind of unforgiving, because it's just going to, all it has for you is a machine, and you need to figure it out, right? So it's like a test in that sense, except it's nice because you're not testing on actual client infrastructure, where if you take down the domain controller, payment processing systems across the world go down, and people are like crying because they can't buy their stuff from McDonald's. Up to me anyways. An alternative is if you want to get both sides, right? Maybe you're not as interested in the pen testing side, but you're looking to be more of a sysadmin role, right? And you want to know, how do I make defensive configurations, or how do I know how to identify what's wrong with my system, right? And you can do what's just called purple teaming. So you set up your own domain controller and you try to attack it from your own pen testing machine. I'm going to talk Kali because that's what I mainly use. And by making those vulnerable misconfigurations, you're going to be able to identify them. And by actually testing them with Kali, you now know how to test them to see, what's actually wrong with Active Directory domain that you set up. This is possible if you just want to see all the different techniques that you can do. There's these two sites, iRedTeam and Hacker Recipes. They have more than just Active Directory tactics and attacks, or techniques and attacks, but they have a lot of Active Directory on it, which is going to be very beneficial, because I know if I'm ever doing an Active Directory or internal NetPen, and it's all of a sudden, I know I can do this, but I kind of forgot how to. You just go there, and the guy just has all the commands you need and explains what they do, how they do it, and how to troubleshoot if it goes wrong. So it's really convenient. But yeah, that's. Oh well, I actually got through this on time. Yeah, I have a few minutes for questions if anyone has any. Awesome. Everybody understood every single word of that. I'm just like that. Thank you. That's one person who said it. One is more than none.
Just like that.
Yeah, that concludes this presentation.
Can you tell people to sign in?
Oh yeah, sign in. Well, this is gonna take a long time.
Did you just?
Oh, you're right. That's great. Use the link tree. The sign in link is feeling a little silly today.
The real link tree, and then one of the first links should be the sign in link. This is also how we track attendance, and so we can, prepare the workshops for you guys. Otherwise, we won't know how many, like. Actually, no, it's convenient. It's still signage.
I don't know if this thing is on or off.
They can hear you, so it's probably on. And then.
It's green.
Green means good.
Yeah, green means go, right?
Yeah.
Which means I have to go to class. It's in like 10 minutes and it's like across campus.
That's
Real for
Thank you,
that.
actually. So nice.
Of course, we support, we love our institution here.
I always go to class.
I love.
I know, he's
Yeah, we
saying
are.
the right things.
Right.
Where's the sign?
But
What?
Yeah, you just.
Alright.
I can relate to this class.
Alright, real quick, so Swift Pals, the form is closing Wednesday, which is tomorrow. So at the end of tomorrow, I'll be closing the form. And interviews, if you guys are interested still in, if you guys are still interested in Swift Pals, interviews are gonna be ending this Friday. So please sign up as soon as you can if you haven't finished yet. And other than that.
What is Swift Pals?
What is Swift Pals? I forgot to talk about that. It's Roblox. Life there is Roblox. So basically Swift Pals is, we kind of just pair you with an e-board member or someone who kind of just knows what they're doing with cybersecurity. And our goal is to get kind of increase your learning, make sure you learn at a faster rate when it comes to, because sometimes you can learn from lectures, and sometimes you kind of not one-on-one to really learn more. And also kind of get you closer to our community. That's kind of what's most important to us. So yeah, let's get you guys closer to everyone and also learn a lot faster. If you guys are still interested, the link to our Swift Pal signup is still in the announcements, so just check that. I think I sent it like yesterday. So
It's in Linktree too.
it's also in the link tree.
Everybody go read Dylan's latest blog.
Oh, that's crazy. I also make malware, so like, there's a blog post on that if you want to look at some goofy malware stuff.
Jacob.
But yeah, no, that's my boy. Right.
Yes.
More like, just show Jake. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
ISA.